Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria and Eastern Antique Arms. Welcome again to another corner of my garden, and I'm actually filming outside mostly today, well partly because it's incredibly hot here in the UK at the moment, by our standards, but also I'm having some work done in the house, so I can't film inside because there's lots of hammering. So I'm doing some restoration stuff at the moment, a mixture of things for myself and also for Eastern Antique Arms, and this is something that I've wanted to look at a little bit more, and I will be looking at more on the channel in future, are how I clean up certain products and in some cases revive, restore, whatever word you want to use. And today we're going to look at leather. Okay, now I have mentioned this in the past, maybe even shown it in the past. I don't think I have, but I've certainly mentioned it in the past. That is my product of choice for leather feeding, okay, which is dubbin, which is essentially, as it says, dubbin leather food nourishes and protects all fine leatherware, and it's got quite conveniently, or kind of appropriately, a picture of a Chelsea pensioner or Royal Hospital member, so it's someone who's an ex-soldier. But these things were used for all sorts of leatherware historically. Belts, boots, saddles, everything like this, scabbards, and that's what I use it for. They've been around since 1890, so funnily enough that is actually kind of period appropriate for a lot of the things I do. What is it? Well, I'm not entirely sure what's inside it actually. I'm sure I could have found out, but it's a strange concoction, I think, of chemicals that is good for leather and helps revive it. Now, when we get antique objects, I'll just pull up a typical, let's pull the, oh that's my label, a typical object that you might find me showing on my channel or on one of my business websites is this scabbard. Okay, so let's dispense with the sword, although notice that has a sword knot on it actually, so I'll keep the sword here for this purpose. Very often these swords come to me in somewhat of a sorry state, and obviously we will deal with cleaning up different elements of the grip or the metalware, the blade, the hilt, whatever, in other videos, and I have dealt with them in previous videos, but we're going to just be looking at leather today. And now this is actually, what I'm going to show is super simple. It's just, in a nutshell, putting dubbin onto the leather, letting it soak in, then rubbing off the excess, and it's as simple as that really. Now what I will say is, while I'm going to show in this video an example of doing that, ideally, in my experience, you want to let the dubbin soak in overnight. Okay, so obviously I can't show that within the scope of this video, but you can imagine that part for yourself. You don't need to sit there for 24 hours and watch them dubbin soak in, although strangely some people might like that. Right, so let's have a little look at the scabbard. I'll talk about the sword knot in a minute, so let's dispense with the sword itself. All we do is you get your dubbin. Now I should note, this is a somewhat strange material that some people might, it's a bit like, almost like butter or lard or fat, and it says, caution, may be liquid, use extreme care with opening pot to avoid spillage. Now, that's an interesting point. So at the moment in the UK, it's pretty warm. It's about 30 degrees, 32 degrees. I think it might even be 34 degrees today. And that's quite warm here. And it means that the dubbin itself is quite, it's like soft butter, essentially. But you know that when butter's cold, it's harder. Well, it's the same with this. In the winter, for example, the dubbin will be more like butter that's been in the fridge for a little bit or in a cold room. So it does have different consistencies at different times of the year. It's better, it's easier to apply when it's softer, okay, and it penetrates into the leather and revitalizes the leather more effectively in warmer times of year. Right, then you get an old rag of any sort. You can, in fact, and I have just used my hands. This is not harmful to your hands, and in fact, funnily enough, it acts kind of like a moisturizer, because you know what leather is made of, it's skin. So in actual fact, getting this on your hands is not a problem. Some people hate the smell of it. I'm personally not bothered by it. Some people like it, but anyway, it's not as good as proper products for moisturising your skin, so I wouldn't recommend you use it as a skin product, but nevertheless, it's not going to do you any real harm. And quite simply, you just wipe some off onto your rag, You get the object that you want to revitalise, and you simply rub it on, and it is that simple. Now what we'll do is let's rub it on, and also stitching. Okay, so with with antique leather, often one of the first things that goes, that you may have just heard Oscar in the background there, he's come to say hi, is the stitching. And this, in my experience, does help revitalise the stitching as well. Also, I should mention it's not harmful on metal, because I think it was originally, Oscar, don't try and eat that, because it was originally designed for things like horse equipment and things like this that have metal incorporated into them. It's been made such that it's not harmful, as far as I'm aware, to any metal. It's never caused any corrosion or rust or anything like that that I've ever seen. Funnily enough, it can act as a rust or corrosion retardant, because it essentially seals off the surface from oxygen. But anyway, now you'll notice where I have done that, let's bring it up to the camera. Trying to touch the camera without getting dubbing on the camera now. It is darker. Now, some people might object to that and say, oh, it's making the thing go darker. Now the problem is, we've essentially made it slightly wet, haven't we? Now it's very difficult to revitalise leather or feed it in any way without making it somewhat darker. If you're thinking about clothing or furniture, I know some people do use dubbin for those purposes, and in fact for boots, some people use dubbin to waterproof boots, essentially leather boots. Be aware of the fact it will make them darker, and if you're not happy with that, then don't use dubbin. In terms of making it darker, it makes it darker while it's wet, and as it gradually kind of evaporates and dries, it does go lighter again, but in my experience it won't be quite as light as it was before you did that. So you'll notice that this scabbard is lighter here and here, and darker where I put the dubbin on it. Now secondly, this has been soaking in for a few seconds. You'll note that it has quite a matte finish. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but it's quite shiny where the leather is here and has been buffed in the past for parade purposes or just general uniform purposes, and it's now matte where the dubbin has been applied. So you have an old towel or something similar of that kind of nature, and then you go onto the bit where you've applied the dubbin and you rub it. And once you've done that, that's right, it's another one of my buffing videos I've become quite famous for, I think, on internet memes that have been, these have been turned into GIFs, and I'm sure that this might happen with this one as well. You rub it for a bit and it brings up the glossy surface again, and also it makes it slightly lighter for some reason, probably because it assists the evaporation process. But most importantly, that leather now becomes supple. Okay, so if we go to this strap, for example, if this was dried out and unnourished leather, which this is relatively but not too bad, it can become stiff, okay, such to the point that if you bend it, it will actually just crack and break off. If you impregnate that with dubbin, it will become supple and soft again. It's really, really good stuff, and that's where we come back to the sword knot. So this sword knot is like cardboard, okay? If I tried to undo that sword knot, and that's why I haven't, it will literally just crumble away into nothing in my hands. So before doing anything with that sword knot, I'll probably leave that one in place because it's been very nicely wrapped. Before doing anything with it, I would literally, and I'll show you now, get my cloth, get a good amount of dubbin onto it, whoops, and literally just dab it on. When something's very fragile, try not to rub or do anything that's going to cause it to fall apart, and just dab thick dollops of dubbin on and leave it, okay, and that will slowly impregnate and it will bring a bit more life back to that leather. Okay, right, we're just going to set the sword aside for a minute. I'm just going to say you can apply this to all sorts of other things, including belts and boots as mentioned, and saddles, which is mostly what it's used for these days, I think. This is an interesting little object. It is what was sometimes known as a life preserver. Some people might refer to it as a priest or even a kosh, and what it essentially is woven leather with a leather strap. Let's put my dubbin-y cloth down with a leather strap. There's various ways you can put this on. It could be like that, or it could be like that, various ways. but leather strap, and then you've got this, you'd hold this end, and this end you can just see sticking out of the end is lead, a lead weight. So that's got a lead weight inside wrapped leather, and this is old, it's probably about 100 years old, probably Edwardian, George V, maybe late Victorian, and it's a lead weight, and it's for clunking people. It's something you can keep in your pocket for clunking them on the head for various reasons. But it's an interesting object. It came to me with some police truncheons, so possibly it was owned by the same person that owned the police truncheons, possibly even a policeman, late Victorian. And this was utterly dried out when I got it, and I have impregnated the whole thing with dubbin. And when I first got this, if I had gone like that, it would have snapped into two pieces. But I've soaked it essentially in dubbin, and now, as you can see, it is bendy again. And that strap was equally, it was like cardboard, and now it's a bendy leather strap again that's usable as a strap. Okay, so there we go. That's what you can do with dubbin. You can literally bring the leather back to life, so to speak. Not literally, actually, because it's not alive, but you know what I mean. You can revitalize the leather. So that's onto the final object, which is actually what gave me the idea to make this video, and that is recently, in fact yesterday, I acquired a set of binoculars. I've been wanting some binoculars for a while, for normal binocular purposes, and these are a pair of 1918 British Army War Department marked binoculars. Let's have a little quick look at binoculars. I'm not going to talk a huge amount about the binoculars themselves, but you can see they're a nice compact pair, and they're 6 times magnification, and they are made by a company called A. Kershaw and Son Limited of Leeds, 1918, and it's got all the information on their binocular prismatic number 3 Mark IIs, magnification 6, number 36715, and on the front we've got 2 sets. I'll just see if I can zoom in on that. You can see there, that is the broad arrow showing that these were issued by the War Department, as these are dated 19, presumably at the end of the First World War. And I've wanted some binoculars for a while, for unusual binocular purposes, and modern binoculars can be pretty expensive, and I thought, well, why don't I buy, you know, it's me, why don't I buy some vintage or, you know, kind of antique binoculars. It's quite hard to find Victorian ones in good condition or with good magnification, but World War I binoculars came on quite a lot, these prismatic ones as well. So yeah, these fitted the bill for me, and they were relatively cheap, and they had the remnants of a case, and it's actually the case that I want to talk about. So the leatherware of this, bearing in mind it's 100 years old, was possibly carried in the last year of World War I, or the last stages of World War I, or perhaps subsequent military campaigning, or kind of military life. And the leather case, whilst it is mostly in one piece, it has some elements missing. It has the main strap missing, it has the end of that strap which will go into the buckle missing, but no biggie. It's something to keep it in, and most importantly for me anyway, it has these loops on the back, so I can wear it on a belt. So if I go hiking, I can, and in fact yesterday I was wearing it on my belt and they work perfectly fine. But and there are some interesting markings on this as well. Okay, so there is a serial number up here, there's a regimental mark up here, there's actually a date on the leather of 1927, so the leather case dates to presumably 1927, so not quite as old as the binoculars themselves, and there's also a painted on number on there. But I don't want this leather to degrade any further than it already has done, so that's where the dubbin comes into play. So I'm going to dubbin the hell out of this and help give it a new lease of life, as it were. That is the strap which actually attaches to the binoculars. I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to dubbin that or replace it. I mean, I'll dubbin it anyway, but I don't know whether I'm going to dubbin it and then use it, or whether I'm going to replace it with a modern one for modern use when I actually take the binoculars out. So there we go. I'll just give you a little view, I guess, of what that will look like. So quite simply, I take my case, I want to dub in all of it. I'll start with this little strap at the top, which is quite fragile. Okay, it could break quite easily. So again, I get my manky old cloth and get some dubbing onto the end of it, and simply, as before, dab the dubbing in So it's nice and thick, and particularly try and get it into the little cracks. And importantly, with a strap where you can get to the underside, I want to apply dubbing on the underneath as well, okay, or the inside of the leather, because remember that I want the dubbing to impregnate as much all the way through the leather as I possibly can do. So you want to get it all in there, and it is like slathering something in butter. It's not particularly pleasant, and you're going to want to rub it off carefully at some point, but I'm now going to leave that to soak in. In fact, off camera I will put a bit more dubbing on. I'll put it on a bit thicker than I have done, as you've just seen me doing there. I'll put a bit more on. In terms of the surface, that's a lot easier. You just get a slob of dubbing and you just whack it on nice and thick, slather it all over, and so it's really thick paste, and leave it to soak in overnight. And then the next day what you'll find, there isn't very much of the paste left, and you just wipe off the excess. Give it a little bit of a soft buff. Remember, don't buff too hard, because that's likely to damage the surface of the leather. And that will revitalise the case, make it look nicer. In some cases you'll notice there's warping to the top here, and some cases, not always, but some cases you find when you rehydrate or refeed that leather, it assumes more of the original shape. It returns back to the shape it should be. It's only kind of gone, it's kind of contracted because it's so dried out. Anyway, I hope that's been useful for some of you. Highly recommend dubbing. I'll put a link below to where you can get it on Amazon, which is where I normally buy these kind of things from. But obviously you can buy it in hardware stores. There are, of course, other leather food products. I understand some people might go, no, don't use dubbing, use X, Y or Z. Everybody has different experiences. I've been using dubbing for years. I've never had any problems with it. I've got other friends who use dubbing. I know restorers who use dubbing. So I kind of swear by it. But I know that some people might go, there is a certain ingredient in its mixture that they're not a big fan of for some reason. And so they'll use something else. Some people have asked me about Renaissance wax. Renaissance wax is good. It's expensive, very expensive for what it is. Personally, I've tried it on leather and I find dubbing more effective than Renaissance wax. For me, Renaissance wax is something that you put on something that you want to put in a museum case. So it's more of a kind of sealing it from the air, but it's not very visible, so therefore you can just put the thing in the case. It looks like a clean object and you're not going to get any moisture or oxidization happening to that metal surface. I'm not personally a fan of it in terms of restoration uses for the most part. I don't really like it very much, to be honest, and I personally wouldn't put it on blades, certainly blades that are going into scabbards, because I don't like the idea of essentially shoving a load of Renaissance wax inside a scabbard that I can never clean out again. I am old school and I use oil for blades on that go into scabbards, preferably gun oil is the best kind. Anyway, I hope that's been useful and interesting. Give me a like, give me a subscribe if you haven't done already, and I will do more restoration videos in the future. Cheers for watching. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.